We're coming up to halfway now in the book of 1 Samuel, and Israel has a king. And really, the whole Bible story shifts at this point because God has made lots of promises. God has made lots of promises that we will get back to paradise, that sin will be dealt with, all these things. But really, the Bible story zooms in now on the king. We need a king who can bring about the good times, these blessings, these promises. And really, from this point on in the Bible, we're looking for that king. Will we get a king who can bring in the good times? And so we start to zoom in here on Saul and whether he is the king that can do it or not. Now, it's not made crystal clear in the book so far, but as Saul starts out as a king, Israel is effectively an enslaved nation. There are lots of enemies around Israel, like the Ammonites we met in chapter 11, but particularly the Philistines. And we're at a time in history where big, powerful enemies would come and they would raid your land, and they would take your stuff, they might impose some rules, and then they'd go home again to their outposts or to their homes for winter. And then next spring, they'd come again. And this is the situation that Israel's in. They are effectively enslaved to nations like the Philistines. And we learn at the end of this chapter, chapter 13, the kind of rules that the Philistines have imposed. They've taken out all the blacksmiths so that Israel can't make swords and spears to fight back. It's a pretty desperate situation. And this is the situation in which Saul becomes king. What kind of king is Saul going to be? Is he going to be the king that we all need, that God's promises rely on? Well, we start out pretty well with Saul. I hope you see that when you read through. He actually rises up against the oppressive Philistines. He gathers people to fight back, to free his people, much like Moses rose up to free his people. But then it all starts to go wrong. And I hope you can spot what goes wrong in in verse 8 and 9 and 10. He doesn't wait. Samuel had, when he had made him king in chapter 10, said, "Go up to Gilgal, wait 7 days, and I'll be there, and I'll offer a sacrifice." Saul goes to Gilgal, waits for 7 days, and then does it himself. He doesn't wait. And really, this is the point where we realise Saul is not going to be the king. Hopefully you'll have a really good time looking at this as a story. And a lot of this chapter sets us up for chapter 14 and the drama that happens there. But I hope you have a good time thinking about waiting, because the Bible does zoom in on this point here. Saul doesn't wait. He doesn't wait for God's promises to come true. He takes it into his own hands. Maybe that's one to get us thinking, because we know what it's like to wait, and we're not necessarily very good at it as well. But hopefully you'll enjoy chatting about this chapter, and there's some questions below to get you thinking.